All right, it is 10 o'clock Sydney time. Welcome everyone to session 3, Pension Finance and Choice Architecture. My name is Katja Hanewald. I am a senior lecturer in the School of Risk and Actuarial Studies, and from January on I'll be an associate professor. I'm also associated with cepar as a director of research of the Aging Asia Hub. And it is my great pleasure to introduce and moderate the presentations of 3 speakers from the Netherlands, Switzerland, and Chile. So it's a truly international session. And we'll kick it off with Damiaan Chen, who's with the University of Amsterdam in the Netherlands, and he has more than 5 years experience as a senior supervisor specialist at the Dutch Central Bank and as a postdoc researcher at the University of Amsterdam. He specializes in combining his knowledge on quantitative modeling with supervisory practice and policy, which is a really cool combination. And he's enthusiastic and passionate about his work by finding solutions to problems that contribute to improving pension schemes. And he also points out that he likes to play piano and do sports, which is a good mix. So it's lovely to have you here. You'll have about 20 minutes for your presentation, and then will have time for Q&A. So take it away, Damiaan.
Thank you very much for this nice introduction and for having me here. So I would like to present a work about intergenerational sharing of unhedgeable inflation risk. It's a joint work with Roel Beetsma and Zweder van Wijnbergen. First, let me explain a little bit about the motivation of the paper. So pension schemes aim at providing benefits that protect the purchasing power. However, they cannot fully provide this protection because the markets are incomplete. And due to this market incompleteness, inflation rate risk can only partially be hedged. In this paper, we consider 2 sources of unhedgeable inflation rate risk. I will explain them later in more detail, but the 2 sources are first, absence of financial instruments to hedge the overall CPI. And the second source is that consumption bundles of people are different from the overall CPI. And in this paper, we explore how members of a collective pension scheme can work together using intergenerational risk-sharing arrangements to share the unhedgeable inflation rate risk in the absence of suitable financial market instruments. So let me zoom in a little bit deeper into the 2 sources of unhedgeable risk. So the first one is about the absence of financial instruments that perfectly hedge the country-specific CPI. So for example, in the Netherlands, there do not exist index-linked bonds. So if we want to hedge the Dutch inflation, we need to do that using foreign index debt or using European inflation swaps. So here are some examples of foreign index-linked bonds. Of course, there's also Australia. But for the Netherlands, we need to hedge using, for example, index-linked bonds of Germany or France. The second source of unhedgeable inflation risk is about the fact that people have different consumption bundles. So in particular, pensioners and workers are exposed to different price developments associated with their own consumption bundle. As an example, elderly consume typically more on healthcare than the average member of the society. So the price development in the healthcare sector is more relevant for the elderly. So even if we would have index-linked bonds, there's still unhedgeable risk as the relevant inflation for pensioners and workers are different. I can illustrate this feature using data from the last 30, 40 years from the US. We can see 2 price indices, one for the elderly and one for workers. And here we clearly see that these indices do not move in tandem. The price index for elderly has moved stronger upwards than the one of the workers, with the main reason is that the healthcare sector become more and more expensive. So now we put these two sources of unhedgeable risk in the model. So let me briefly explain the economy of the model. So we have a consumer price index that follows a mean reverting process and has two risk factors, an hedgeable risk and an unhedgeable risk component. The stock prices follow a geometric Brownian motion. We have a fixed interest rate. This is the index-linked bond, and this is a little bit more specific. We have a geometrically weighted average of the prices for the workers and the retirees. So the overall CPI, capital Pi, can be split into two price indices for workers and for retirees. And the difference in these processes, it follows a random noise process with volatility sigma r. The demography works as follows. There's a generation that enters the pension scheme. The generation works for TR years and dies after TD years. And we assume for now that the retirement is half of the time spent in the pension scheme. During the working period, agents receive a wage income, and during retirement there is no wage income, but they can retrieve income from their accumulated wealth that they accumulated during the working phase. And we optimize the savings and the investment decision. So at every period, the agent can freely choose what to consume and what to save. And the part that has been saved, they can also optimize their allocation to stocks and to bonds and to index-linked bonds. The utility is derived over consumption in real terms. So capital C is the nominal consumption and pi is the price index. So real consumption is the small c. And then we derive lifetime utility using this formula. And we have a budget constraint. So let me briefly explain, highlight some components of the budget constraint. H is the wage income. C is the consumption, so real wealth grows with high income, but decreases when more has been consumed. It also increases with the interest rate and decreases with expected inflation. Theta S is the allocation that is invested in stocks, and theta R is the allocation that is invested in index-linked bonds. So if we would invest 0 in stocks and 100% in index-linked bonds, these two lines become 0, and then only one source of risk remains, which is the unhedgeable risk, which is the lowest line. Before I explain the results, maybe a brief overview of how we consider the results. So the optimization procedure is explained in the paper. So I'm not going to explain that in this presentation in too much detail, but what we do is we derive 10,000 simulation paths of the economy. And we start with the autarky case, so without any risk sharing. Then we introduce some risk sharing arrangements and again derive the welfare in that intergenerational risk sharing setting and compare it with autarky. And the difference between the two is what we call the welfare effects, which is the main interest of this paper. So let's first consider the autarky case. Here we see that wealth starts at 0 when the generation enters the pension scheme. And when the generation dies, wealth is 0 again. During the working phase, wealth increases, and during retirement, wealth decreases. Consumption is optimized, so therefore we also see a rather stable profile. And on the two bottom panels, we see the investment, the graphs regarding investment. So on the left side, we see the typical life cycle pattern for stock investments. It starts at 100% and it gradually decreases up to retirement. And on the bottom right, we see the investments in the index-linked bond. It starts at 0 and then it slowly it starts increasing. The reasoning is as follows. In our baseline setup, we assume that human capital is risk-free and follows the price index. So, in fact, we can consider in the human capital as a index-linked bond, because it's risk-free and it follows the price index. So when people are young, they have already, because of their human capital, a lot of index-linked bond allocation. So therefore, the financial investments in index-linked bonds is 0 at the start. But when the agent gets older, the human capital decreases, and to compensate for that, the agent starts investing in index-linked bonds when it gets older and older. Here we see what the losses are that are caused by unhedgeable risk. And from this graph, we see that the losses are mainly dominant for the old generations. The reasoning is, again, when people are old, they don't have human capital, which is in some way a natural hedge against inflation risk. So now I would like to introduce the risk-sharing arrangements. And we can consider two types of arrangements. The first one is a one-off contract, and then we consider an infinite horizon contract. In a one-off contract, workers and retirees agree on a risk-sharing arrangement as long as both are alive. What happens in this contract is that the retirees move their unhedgeable risk to the workers. In the infinite horizon, the contract does not stop when the retirees die, but it continues forever. When the retirees die, the workers become the new retirees, and new workers arrive at the pension scheme, and the contract starts all over again. So because the retirees move their risk to the workers might want to get compensated for that. So therefore they can negotiate a risk premium for insuring the retirees against the unhedgeable risk. In formulas, it looks as follows. It's quite similar to a swap contract. The theta U is the allocation to the intergeneral risk-sharing arrangement. It's a number between 0 and 1. And as I said, it's similar to a swap contract with a fixed leg and a floating leg. The fixed leg is the risk premium, and the floating leg are the two unhedgeable sources of risk. So this is how the budget constraint then changes due to this contract. And now let me discuss the results. The left panel shows the working generation welfare gain, and the right panel shows the welfare gain of the retirees. And vertical axis is the welfare gain. The left axis is the allocation to the risk-sharing contract, and the right axis is the risk premium. So let me first start with a theta U equal to 0. This means that there is no allocation to the intergenerational risk-sharing contract, which basically means that we are back at the autarky case, because there's no risk-sharing at all. And therefore, for theta U is 0, we of course see that the welfare gain compared to autarky is 0 as well. So now if we move theta U is 0 to theta U is 1, then we see that for the working generations, welfare decreases, and for the retired generations, for the retirees, it increases. Which also makes sense because we simply move risk from the retirees to the workers. Now, if we also give compensation for the fact that workers get more risk, using a risk premium, we see that welfare for the workers increase and welfare for the retirees decrease. So this is the one-off contract And this is the infinite horizon contract. So for the retirees, it does not change anything, because for them, it doesn't matter if the contract continues when they die. But for the workers, we see that welfare increases, because they also get this protection when they are old themselves. We can do also a social welfare analysis, but because of the time, switch to the conclusion. To wrap up, pension schemes cannot fully protect purchasing power, as there is unhedgeable inflation rate risk, and I consider two sources of risk. One is that there's absence of financial instrument to hedge the overall CPI, and the other one is that pensioners and workers are exposed to different price developments. These risks cause a loss, and the loss during retirement is in a range of 0.4 to 0.8% in terms of certainty equivalent consumption. But using intergenerational risk-sharing arrangements, we can maybe reduce this loss. And we have seen a welfare improvement up to about 0.2% using these arrangements, where retirees and workers in a pension scheme agree on a contract. And the reasoning is as follows: retirees benefit from this arrangement because they can move the risk to the workers and therefore have less fluctuations in consumption. And for workers, they benefit from the arrangement by receiving a risk premium from the retirees, but also by getting this protection, this insurance, when they are old themselves. So that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for and good timing. So this is really, really relevant given the current inflation developments around the world. So thank you for sharing this with our group here. We are now very fortunate to have two authors here from Chile, and let me introduce them. So we have Paulina Granados. She's the head of research at the Pension Regulatory Authority in Chile and has been since 2017. Also acting as executive secretary of the Association International of an international organization of pension regulators, pension supervisors, and she has an impressive track record of working in international organizations and government institutions, including the OECD and the Central Bank of Chile, and also working at Amnesty International. So it's a very distinguished career. And she's joined by a colleague and co-author, Denise Laroze, from the Universidad de Santiago de Chile. So it's a true pleasure to have you both here. And we look forward to hearing about your research.
Thank you very much. Good morning from Chile. It's very early morning here. It is an honor to present today our research on how improving the design of available pension information options can indeed improve pension selection in Chile. The field experiment implemented in 2019, there was a joint work with the Oxford University and the Universidad de Santiago de Chile, with the Pension Regulatory Authority. Which is also a very good example on how synergies among different actors can improve policymaking and then the well-being of the users of our benefits. A brief introduction: Chile has a compulsory defined contribution pension system since the 80s that covers around 70% of the working age population. Okay. At the time of the experiment, it was realized that consumers of private pension systems were not selecting the best options that providers gave them, the best, meaning the largest net present value of the selected option. So in other words, pensioners were not selecting their best pension options. Okay, so the aim of this experiment was to test how to improve such a behavior. When the individuals decide to retire in Chile, they have to choose their pension modality. Okay, we have two products, let's say annuities and programming withdrawal, and all the offers they get from the industry. I will explain later what it is, the setting. So these private providers give the offers, and all these offers are consolidated through a platform that we call SCOMP. Yeah, that was the slide before this one. And SCOP means there is a system of carries and offers of pensions amount. Okay. So here I briefly explain, because I think it's very important to focus on the results that my colleague will show later. So here, what you see, it's when the pre-pensioner, I will call the people asking for pensions, when they want to retire, they ask the pension administrators, that is the blue buildings, like in the first here, the blue buildings. These are the administrators of pension fund that have the money that the people have saved during lives. So they give a certificate or information saying how much money they have available for pension, and they send, and all this information plus preferences of the pre-pensioners are sent to this SCOP, yeah, to this system that consolidate all the information. Afterwards, SCOP send the information to the insurance companies and to the AFPs, we call it, the pension fund administrators. Yeah, the consumer, these are the oranges arrows. So they send all these informations, and the insurance companies and the pension fund administrators send offers of annuities and pension withdrawal, given the information, the preferences of the pre-pensioner, characteristics of the pre-pensioners, and given the money they have available for pension. Okay, so they consolidate all this information in a certificate, in a very simple certificate, where they put all the offers organized, ranked, let's say, from the best to the worst, in a way. Okay, so in the next slide, you will see then what it is our, the next slide, please, Denise. So this is our status quo. This is exactly what the people saw at the time of the experiment, okay, when they got offered. This is an example for annuities. So what they say in the first row is the option. As you see, they are ranked from 1 to 9 in this case. In the second column, you will see the name of the company. That is also important. These are the companies that made an offer for this example in 2019. So also the person can see the name of the company and if they have any preferences for a given company, for example. In the third column, it is the money, let's say. This is the monthly, this is in a unit that it is, it's a real amount, but whatever, the important thing is that it is organized, it is ranked from the highest to the lowest. Okay, this is the offer, the monthly offer that the company is making. And in the last column, you will see the risk classification of the specific company making the offer. Okay, so this is our status quo. From here, we started to propose a different design or architecture, as we call it in the paper, to see if changing the setting or how we show the information, people would better choose. Denise.
And so we start thinking about this process as an innovation. So what kind of innovation can we introduce to the way that the SCOP offers are presented? And so what we do is looking at the literature, right? We know that people don't understand a lot of risk. They have very low financial literacy in general, and it's very hard to process these types of information. You also know that there's a type of cognitive overload when there's too much information to process, especially when these are in complex terms, right? And we know that people at an older age generally make more financial mistakes. So we were looking at ways in which to simplify. And the first alternative that we have is, so we changed the currency. The first currency that Paulina showed you is in an interest rate, an inflation fixed unit, right? So this is not everyday currency. This is not what people pay in when they go to the shop, but it is the financial currency in which you can take a loan, in which you could pay for a mortgage, right? Which is adjusted by inflation. So the first thing that we do is we try to put it into terms that people use on their everyday, in an everyday scenario. Just a very simple change, and just making it closer to the person's experience. And then what we have, our biggest innovation here is our jump is what we do is well, we take out the risk, right? We keep the money in pesos, probably would have been the same in UEFs. We take out risk and leave it in a link below. I'll show you in a second how that looks like. So we altered the way in which the risk information is presented. And most importantly, we add a loss nudge, right, to the information that people are given. And now this is a very small nudge. I know it looks big because it's in the thousands, but that's because the Chilean peso has been deflated. But this is about $9 to $10 a year, right? So if you choose option number 2 versus company number 1, right, you're going to lose $10 in a year. If you choose option 9, you're going to lose $240 or $250-ish a year. We thought that was going to be low. We thought it as a nudge it could work, right? But we thought it was going to be low because the amounts aren't very high. And we kept the risk information, but we separated it into a different link. So the person would have to make an effort. Interested people would have to make an effort to go, but also simplified the way the information is presented, which basically implies that only one of these companies has any kind of long-term risk, because the market is very rich. And so what a third innovation here is, well, instead of presenting the information just in terms of how much money a person is going to get each year, we just show the overall, the long-term expected value of the pension, right? Which would give us, here we keep the loss column, but we give larger numbers, right? So it starts at, say, $180 and would go up to $4,000, right? $4,000 and some dollars. So it would be larger amounts. So I thought that would have a larger effect on kind of the deterrence for the loss. And then our largest innovation or proposal was that we have everything, every bit of information that's presented in this table, what changing the format in which the information is provided. So combining colors and supposedly making it easier to kind of clearly identify the top group. You'll see it does not necessarily make it. And so this is just a summary. I'm going to skip this. We tailored this so people would get experiences that were similar to themselves. So women would see values of real women that had to make choices at the time, and that would depend on their income level. So we did 4 different income levels for women, 4 different income levels for men, and then we let them choose different alternatives. So we had annuities, we had programmed withdrawals, and we had the possibility of them mixed. So we had a whole bunch of variations that people, each person experienced 2 alternatives, right? So basically, this is a summary of our hypothesis. We thought that we'd have the largest effects with the most variation, right? So with the 4th treatment, which we included the graph, would generate a link to a higher interest in the top option, in the first option. We expected some level of heterogeneity, so we controlled for financial literacy, we controlled for income, we controlled for how familiar the companies were. I'm not going to show these results because we basically get nulls. We, at least in the way that we processed or collected the information, we don't have any company heterogeneity, but we do have financial literacy heterogeneity that I'll show you. So this was done on a Qualtrics survey. We did collected a whole bunch of information on sociodemographic pension informations, asked risk aversion pensions. We also asked present bias preferences. This collected a sample of about 1,041 individuals between the ages of 55 and 70 that had not yet retired. So at least they declared they hadn't retired. So they were new to the process. And at the target age that would start participating within the SCOMP, right? We recruited doing social media, grassroots. It was very hard. It took us about 8 months. So how did we incentivize this? We told them that we'd ask them to make decisions, that they'd get different options, and that the top option would be paid, this is $1.50, right? And the lowest option would be paid nothing, they also got paid like a lump sum. This was just extra to what they could achieve during the experiment. And we so if you chose the second or third or so on and so forth, you'd get lower levels of payment, right? Just to try to make it compatible with what we showed here, right? So the cost in making a decision that's not the highest income generating option of the alternatives that are available. Okay, so what do we find? Well, we find two very interesting things. The first of all is, well, there's barely no difference in just changing the monetary unit, right? If they understand it, they understand it. If they don't understand it, they probably don't, but this is not statistically different. So would be cheap and simple, but probably not very efficient. The biggest jump is here in T2, which is a very simple, very small, easy to calculate loss nudge, right? And reducing information. So keeping only risk information for those that are interested in it. We also checked this with program withdrawal. So we did a separation. I'm not going to show the analysis, it's too long for this presentation, but we do several checks, and it's basically here, it is the loss that's driving, the loss information that's driving the jump, more than just taking risk out of the calculation or the image in the original calculation. Right? And making a huge innovation in graphics doesn't seem to pay out, right? You achieve a lot more with a very simple change to a table, right? Then which is very cost effective in terms of like the SCOMP program, right? It's just, in this case, it's it's changing one column that says risk to now showing information about losses. So it's in terms of development, it's very, very cheap, right? And you'd get your biggest effects. So this is just to show you that when you do regressions, obvious statistically significant results show up, and that we control for a bunch of things: financial literacy, age, income. None of these have any impact on the sides of the coefficient. Everything is balanced, so on. So if we look at the highest net present value offer selection, so this is a dummy, right? So whether you chose the top one or not, instead of if you got more money from your choice, we also see the same jump, right? So we see that people choosing like the first option in the control and treatment one are about roughly 25%, right? And this goes up to 50% choosing this first offer, at least within our sample. And this is pretty standard with 2 and 3. As I said, we did heterogeneity tests, right? And so this is a Bayesian estimation, random tree estimation of causal treatment effects, average causal treatment effects. And so what do we see here is that, so high financial literacy individuals, which are the purple, are on the lower end of the, on the left end of this graph, right? This is where you get the lowest marginal effects, lowest marginal differences between treatments. So treatment here is having the risk, having the loss or not having the loss, right? You'd see this is where we get the lowest effects, and then our highest effects are within low or no financial literacy. And by no, this is actually, these are 3 financial literacy questions, 2 compound interest rate, with one of which 2 are compound interest rate questions and 1 is the bat and ball question.
Denise, you have about 1 minute left. I'm so sorry.
Oh, we're fine.
Okay.
We're almost done. So
Good.
this is just to show you with the population, right? So this is the population at the time that we collected the sample, which we're getting very similar to our control and our treatment samples. So we could expect to see this jump if it was implemented, right? And so what ended up happening is, well, we presented, so these results provide robust evidence that our treatment 2, which is the simple change of adding this visual nudge, it reduces kind of unintended wrong choices in the SCOMP structure, right? And so by changing very small things in the choice architecture of for the population, right, you could potentially get a lot of substantive changes in welfare, right? And this has now been implemented in Chile, right? So 2019, I think, 2020, we started this exact change, our exact treatment 2 was implemented, right? And we haven't been able to look at real data yet and do some discontinuity approach, because we got COVID right in between, and that changed a lot of the pension decisions, right? So it's a very altered sample at this point. And any suggestions on how we could deal with that would be very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you so much. What an exciting research project with real impact on people's decisions that they face and helping them making better decisions. So congratulations to the whole team for this really interesting and impactful research.